You're a monkey. It's about 10 million years ago, and you're on the forest floor picking through rotting fruit that fell off the tree days ago. It's mushy, it smells sharp, and it's got a faint kick to it. You eat it anyway. You keep eating it. And somewhere in your bloodstream, an enzyme is working overtime to break down something your body has never encountered before: ethanol. This is the story of how humans discovered alcohol. Not vodka, not craft IPAs, not the guy at the wedding who insists on doing a toast that's actually just a 10-minute stand-up set. We're talking about the very first time a living creature in our family tree processed alcohol and didn't just survive it, but liked it. And the trail this leaves behind is way older and way weirder than most people assume. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. Drinking doesn't start with beer. It doesn't start with wine, or monks, or ancient Egyptians, or some clever farmer who left grain in water too long. The desire for alcohol might be baked into our biology millions of years before humans existed at all. And the evidence for that is sitting inside your own DNA right now. Let's start with the fruit, because before you can talk about drinking, you have to talk about eating, specifically eating fruit that's a little too ripe. Wild yeast lives on the skin of fruit. When that fruit falls and starts to break down, the yeast starts eating the sugar inside it and releasing alcohol as a byproduct. This has been happening in forests for tens of millions of years, long before anything resembling a human walked upright. And around 10 million years ago, something changed in the digestive chemistry of our ape ancestors. Researchers studying an enzyme called ADH4, the one responsible for breaking down alcohol in your gut, found a single mutation shared by humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas that made this enzyme roughly 40 times more efficient at metabolizing ethanol. 40 times. That's not a small upgrade. That's evolution installing a much better liver update right around the time our ancestors started spending more time on the ground instead of up in the trees, which happens to be exactly where all that fallen, fermenting fruit was piling up. Scientists call this the drunken monkey hypothesis, and no, that is a real, published, peer-reviewed term. The idea, first proposed by biologist Robert Dudley, is that our attraction to alcohol isn't some modern character flaw. It's an ancient survival strategy. Fermenting fruit smells stronger than fresh fruit. That smell traveled further through dense forest, acting like a beacon, pointing our ancestors toward a reliable, sugar-rich, calorie-dense meal. The animals that could smell it, chase it down, and actually digest the alcohol in it without getting poisoned had an edge. They found more food. So, in a very real sense, some of the same biological wiring that makes a modern human enjoy a drink evolved, because getting good at processing fermented fruit used to be the difference between eating dinner and going hungry. Your taste for alcohol might be older than your taste for cooked food. Now, here's where we have to slow down, because there's a massive difference between our bodies being able to process alcohol and humans actually, intentionally, deliberately making it. Let's look at what the archaeology actually says. For a long time, the oldest confirmed alcohol production in the world came from Jiahu, a Neolithic village in China's Henan province. Henan province, where archaeologists analyzing residue inside 9,000-year-old pottery jars found chemical traces of a mixed fermented drink made from rice, honey, and hawthorn fruit or wild grape. This wasn't an accident sitting in a jar. This was production. People were combining specific ingredients in specific vessels to make something intoxicating on purpose, back in 7000 BC. And then, in 2018, that record got smashed. A team from Stanford analyzed 3 stone mortars found inside Rekhvet Cave, a burial site near Haifa, Israel, used by a hunter-gatherer people called the Natufians. The residue inside those mortars showed something remarkable: starch that had been deliberately germinated, dried, mashed, and fermented. In other words, beer, 13,000 years old. And here's the detail that should stop you in your tracks. The Natufians weren't farmers yet. This was before agriculture. These were hunter-gatherers who apparently cared enough about having a fermented drink at funerals that they were processing grain for it thousands of years before anyone planted the first deliberate crop. Some archaeologists now argue this flips the old assumption completely. We used to think agriculture came first, and beer came later as a happy side effect. The Rakefet cave evidence suggests it might have gone the other way. Humans may have started cultivating grain because they wanted more beer, not because they wanted more bread. Let that sink in for a second. One of the pillars of human civilization, farming, the thing that eventually gave us permanent settlements, cities, writing, empires, all of it, might have been kickstarted by hunter-gatherers who really wanted to keep the party going. Around 11,000 years ago, at a site in southeastern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe, often described as the oldest known monumental structure on Earth, archaeologists found massive limestone troughs, some capable of holding over 150 liters of liquid. Chemical residue inside them contains oxalates, a compound produced during the fermentation of grain. Göbekli Tepe wasn't a village. It wasn't a farm. It was a ritual gathering site built by hunter-gatherers who traveled long distances to construct something enormous together. And there's a real possibility that what got thousands of people to cooperate on hauling multi-ton stone pillars was, in part, the promise of a serious communal drink at the end of the work. There's a human angle here that's easy to miss if you just focus on the chemistry. Alcohol lowers social inhibition. It makes strangers relax around each other faster. And for early humans, that mattered enormously. Building trust between different bands of hunter-gatherers, coordinating large-scale labor, forming alliances between groups who didn't automatically trust each other, all of that required some kind of social lubricant, literally. Shared drinking rituals created a fast track to group bonding in a species that depended entirely on cooperation to survive. This wasn't just people getting buzzed for fun. This was, in a very real sense, ancient social infrastructure. The same way we talked about ritual smoke being infrastructure. A shared cup around a fire may have done as much for early human cooperation as any tool or weapon. Here's where the story gets uncomfortable, though, because the line from ritual fermented grain to what alcohol became is not a clean one. For most of human history, alcohol was low-proof, communal, and embedded in ceremony. Harvest festivals, funerals, religious rites. Distillation changed that. Once humans figured out how to concentrate alcohol into spirits, sometime in the medieval period, the intoxicating power of a drink jumped dramatically, and so did the potential for harm. By the industrial era, alcohol had been stripped of most of its ceremonial context and turned into a mass-produced commodity. Marketed aggressively, taxed by governments, and in some periods deliberately used as a tool of colonial exploitation, traded into indigenous communities specifically to create dependency and leverage. The same chemical that once helped hunter-gatherers build trust around a fire became, in the wrong hands, a weapon for control and a public health catastrophe. A Natufian mourner fermenting grain for a funeral and a colonial trading company shipping barrels of rum for profit both involve ethanol. Almost nothing else about them is the same. So when did humans start drinking? The honest answer is we genuinely don't know exactly, and we may never pin down a single moment. The biological hardware for processing alcohol goes back roughly 10 million years, long before there were humans to speak of. The archaeological evidence for deliberate brewing goes back at least 13,000 years, and possibly further, since fragile organic residues rarely survive that long in the ground. What we do know is that by the time any civilization started keeping written records, alcohol was already everywhere, already ritualized, already tangled up in religion, medicine, celebration, and grief. The specific drinks changed. The ingredients changed. The rituals changed. But the underlying behavior, humans deliberately altering their own brain chemistry together, in groups, on purpose, was already ancient before anyone thought to write it down. There's something almost fitting about where this all started. A monkey on a forest floor, drawn in by a smell. Eating fruit that was just a little too ripe. Developing a taste for something it didn't fully understand yet. Millions of years later, that same basic biological pull is still there every time someone raises a glass at a wedding, cracks open a drink after a long week, or pours one out for someone they lost. You're not just having a drink. You're taking part in one of the oldest, strangest, most complicated relationships our species has ever had with a single molecule.